Today we have AI won't steal your job, but it'll rewrite your rejects. So please welcome Dan Wilson. Over to you, Dan.
Thank you. So at this point, I'm going to bet all of you have heard of AI, but I want you to sort of circle back to the first time that you heard about it. Whenever I introduce AI to a new person, they respond in one of two ways, either with a lot of exuberance or a lot of skepticism. It's usually pretty polar, and I don't know why. We can work with either one, but which one were you? So, when encountering a technology, we're going to trend towards one of these areas. So, uh, in the in the wise words of the Simpsons, back in my day, it was, let's say, 2009. And for those of you who were around, this was the earliest days of Twitter. Don't even know if Facebook was a thing yet. We got all of our information from blogs, and I had a blog. My blog looked kind of like this. And one day I was at my desk working, and Steve Nelson and I were chatting, and I was doing something the long way around. And he says, "You don't know regular expressions, do you?" And I thought, guilty. So I did what I do. I made a regular expressions tutorial series for my blog, and I went through 6 different lessons of teaching people regular expressions because that's the best way that I can teach me. This was a pretty popular set of tutorials, so I wasn't the only one. Here's what one of these looked like. You can see that, this nonsense in the middle actually means something beyond just a place for me to publish my comedic rants. Like if you read my text, I've got some jokes in there. Just have a good time writing blogs, not so good of a time writing regular expressions, but it gets the job done. So fast forward to 2023. This is probably when most of you started hearing the AI buzzwords, and with it came great and wonderful promises. And when you first logged into an AI tool like ChatGPT, it looks pretty basic. What are you supposed to do with it? So I thought, well, this doesn't do a whole heck of a lot, does it? So you could count me on the skepticism side. Now, I'm not the only voice. The exuberance team has certainly had a lot to say. Here's an example of what I mean. Business Insider this last summer had an article that says an AI researcher said that most jobs will be wiped out by 2045, but sex workers, politicians, and sports coaches will survive. What an unusual group to survive this AI onslaught, I think, isn't it? I guess the rest of us are all gone. So sorry for the plumbers. And you might ask, like, without a lot of insight, is this true? I default back to asking myself, is this over exuberance or over skepticism? So the fine folks at Gartner have a technology adoption curve, and it looks like this. They call it the hype cycle. Take a second and study this. You can see that everything sort of starts with a technology trigger. The web went through this kind of cycle. Blockchain went through this kind of cycle. AI is kind of going through this cycle right now. But the technology trigger starts, and then people start seeing use cases everywhere, and then imagining it can do great numbers of things, and that the technology has no limits. It will only go up and to the right until its logical conclusion. But what usually happens is there are some limits. There's limits in everything, and then those limits sort of come to the forefront, and we pass this peak of inflated expectations and then head into the trough of disillusionment, where we see that half of these predictions that we thought up and talked about and in breathless ways aren't going to come true at all. Like, where is my flying car anyway? I've been waiting for that. But past the trough of disillusionment comes the slope of enlightenment, followed by the plateau of productivity. And this is where we finally understand what this thing is good for and what it isn't, and we wield it well to do great and wonderful things, but the whole world's not going to end. Now, let's look at another article. This one's from the Economic Times. Company that sacked 700 workers with AI now regrets it, scrambles to rehire as automation goes horribly wrong. Oof, who saw that coming? Is this exuberance or is it skepticism? Tricked you. It's realism because this is actually based on a true story. Let's look at what happened. So, back in 2022, Klarna made its headlines when it laid off 700 workers, a significant portion of its workforce at the time. The CEO was vocal about embracing AI tools that could do things like customer support, translation, content creation, and even executive level decision making. I wonder if the AI thought of laying off these 700 workers. I digress. And then, as this article goes on to say, that Klarna began facing a huge surge in customer complaints, a dip in user satisfaction, and a growing frustration with the AI systems that had replaced its human workforce. Oh no! Who could have foreseen the robots couldn't take over? So, let's look at another one. Exactly 6 months ago, the CEO of Anthropic said that in 6 months, AI would be writing 90% of the code. Is this exuberance or is this skepticism? Let's look at what really happened. Because you would think the CEO of Anthropic would have his pulse on what AI is capable of. Turns out AI has been found to slow down software engineers and increase their workload. Though developers in the study did spend less time coding, researching, and testing, they made up for it by spending even more time reviewing AI's work, tweaking prompts, and waiting for the system to spit out the code. It goes on to say that cybersecurity researchers recently found that developers who use AI to spew out code end up creating 10 times the number of security vulnerabilities than those who write code the old fashioned way. Looks like our jobs might be safe for now. Here's another one. Vibe coding service Replit deletes users' production database. Faked data told fibs galore. AI ignored instruction to freeze code, forgot it could roll back errors, and generally messed everything up. So here's what happened. Jason Lemkin, founder of SaaStr, got super jazzed up about vibe coding. He says, I spent the other day in vibe coding on Replit for the first time, and I built a prototype in just a few hours that was pretty cool. He goes on to say later that the Replit service deleted his database and then advised him that it could not restore the database. However, it was wrong and the rollback did work. So after all this, you're probably thinking, why don't we just kill the technology? Well, it is tempting. But remember that curve I showed you earlier, because all this is just part of a natural progression. Now, if you look at this image, I actually had AI make this image for me. It'll be instructive if we look at the prompt that I used to make this image. So it's on the screen now. My prompt is, make an image that shows a robot head and a guillotine. The style of the image is cartoonish and futuristic. There should be no text on the slide. Use very vibrant colors. The slide should be rectangular and fit a PowerPoint slide. Now, I think you'd agree there's an awful lot of detail here. And the AI got a lot right. But do you see my last point? The rectangular bit? Let's look at the image one more time. I added in a gray background just so you could see what AI thinks rectangular is. Now, I've done my fair share of fulfilling requirements, and usually I have to fulfill them all. But in this case, 4 out of 5 isn't bad, right? Why did AI ignore this? Well, let's run the exact same prompt again. It'll give us the same image, right? But rectangular. Now, as you can see, this appears to be a very different image. The style of the image is cartoonish and futuristic, so yes. Make an image that shows a robot head and a guillotine. I see a robot head with a necktie over its head. I'm not sure if that's a guillotine, but let's go on. There should be no text on the slide. Check mark. Use very vibrant colors. Yes. The slide should be rectangular and fit a PowerPoint slide. It's not rectangular. This time it added the white background on top of its rectangular image. It was so close to right, but then filled it in with a strange white square. And then just to prove the case, I used a large gray rectangle to show what should have been. It's a very different image. Let's look at it side by side. On the left was prompt 1. There's a guillotine, a robot's head, vibrant colors, but it's not rectangular. The next one, there's a robot head and a necktie, very vibrant colors, still not rectangular. Let's try it one more time. Maybe the third time is a charm. Nice. There's a robot head. There's a guillotine. I don't know what the tree stump is about, but I'm sure that was important for some reason. How the guillotine is going to cut off the robot's head is yet to be determined. But the style is cartoonish and futuristic. There should be no text on the slide. Check. Use very vibrant colors. Yep. And it should be rectangular and fit a PowerPoint slide. Well, we seem to be getting 4 out of 5 consistently right and some gray area to fill in the blanks. What is going on here? We give it a consistent input, the same prompt 3 times, and we get inconsistent output. This is not what we want for programming, is it? The code that I used to write, it always does the same thing. In this case, when you tell it the same thing, it does something different. Well, at this point, AI in general and LLMs in particular are non-deterministic. And the difference is deterministic means one output comes from one input and only one execution path is followed. Think of it like a recipe that gives the same dish when followed, or I don't know, a vending machine. You push a D1 and out pops the Skittles. Non-deterministic, where output is not predictable, it's not based on just the input. Many paths can be explored simultaneously. So that would be like a vending machine where you push the button for Skittles and out pops some sort of cake or a puppy. Now, there are ways you can sort of focus the AI. There's a couple of parameters in most LLMs. The temperature is one, and then the top P is another. So you can sort of combine these two parameters to suit different use cases. Like think of temperature like a spice level. And if you put a high temperature, it sort of gets more random in what it might come up with. You could think of it like more creativity. Top P is where it might choose from a wide variety of possible options instead of just the normal few. So it'll make more sense when we look at which combination of parameters are the best use case for different things. For example, for code generation, we don't need a whole lot of creativity. So the temp and the top P are set fairly low. In this case, the code would be more deterministic. You'd get more correct code. And then on the other side of the spectrum, if you're doing creative writing, you really don't want it to be formulaic and samey. So you dial up your temperature and your top P. And so the right parameter here depends on what you're trying to do. If you're using an AI tool from an API, you probably have access to these parameters. If you're using it inside of an LLM like ChatGPT, Claude, or Gemini, it's probably pre-configured in some sort of way for you already. So with that, something to keep in mind when you're working with AI is it has a context window. Now, think of a context window like this game you've probably played at Chuck E. Cheese. You put in a coin, the coin falls down, the little pusher up top goes back and forth, and hopefully what it does is push a whole bunch of coins down and you get to keep them. I don't know about you, but when I played this, I thought there's some kind of gravity defying force field underneath it because coins cannot fall for a very long time. But going back to the metaphor here, think of these coins like a context window. The AI has a certain amount of capacity, and then when something tips it over the capacity, something falls out of the context window. And what happens when that occurs is the AI kind of forgets something important. Now, context windows are getting bigger, but they have finite limits. And, if I paste in a few paragraphs, the context window isn't very full. But if I hand it 2 million lines of source code, that's probably not all fitting in the context window. So if you're working with AI and you see it's starting to either get forgetful or inventive, it may be a context window problem. In fact, I can show you a better example of what this looks like. So imagine that there's a sliding window, and these boxes in the middle is your context, things you've told it. The context window sort of slides forward, and the lesser used or the older types of information tend to get forgotten to make space for the newer stuff. So keep an idea that while you think it's seen all of the things you've told it, like everybody else, it has a finite amount of capacity and it's easy to overrun that. So this means AI has its limits, and there's cases where it's not going to perform well. Another case where it might not perform well is an ethical dilemma. So if you look at this diagram and imagine that, oh no, a trolley is heading towards these 5 lobsters, and you can pull the lever to defer to the other track that either hits a cat or leave it alone and it crushes 5 lobsters, what do you do? Is a lobster worth 3 cats? Is a cat worth 3 lobsters? Like, someone has to make this decision. And the way we handle this now in driving, for example, is the driver is in control and the driver is responsible. If we get into a world of automatic driving, somebody has to account for these types of costs. Is an old man worth 2 little kids? Is a kid worth 3 old people? Like, it's grim to think about, but these decisions are going to get made for us unless we stay in control. And frankly, having the driver be responsible seems a lot more humane than some random nameless AI. So I've told you a lot of problems, a lot of things. So what is actually AI good for? Well, one of the things it's super good for is summarizing and transforming content based on patterns in a given context. It is really good at that. So the year is 2025, and let's say I had a SD card, and I'm trying to figure out why I can't write to this SD card. So rather than Google around, I asked ChatGPT what the problem is, and it gave me 7 things to try, one of which was a command line argument that I ran, and it actually fixed the SD card. Now, I probably could have found that Googling, but maybe not. Another case is I had a bike chain that something broke on it. The bike chain and the derailleur kind of snapped off. And I'm not a bike guy, so I didn't really know what the problem could be. So after Googling and watching a bunch of YouTube videos, I took a picture of the broken piece, and it took me directly to a site that sold this exact piece. And on that website was about 2,000 other little things just like it that looked exactly alike, except for some microatomic differences I never would have paid attention to. So these 2 things, pattern matching and context, are super helpful with AI. Now, how does this factor into software development? Well, I wrote a course that has, I think it's 9 different segments here, and it's done sort of through the lens of a developer day. And when I came up with the idea for this original presentation, I thought, you know what I'll do? I'll do all of these demos for everybody, and that will be great. But this is only a 50-minute session, and you might want to take your time with it. So I put on the screen now an access code that you can use to get access to this course for free. It's limited to the first 100 of you. So if for some reason 101 try to sign up, just hit me up after class. I'm not protective of this. I want you to be able to work with this material in your own time with your own materials and keyboard. So take a screenshot of that. I'll give you a sec. And then we're going to walk through some examples together. We'll show this at the end too, just in case. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to flip over to ChatGPT. There's really three LLMs that have the predominant market shares. ChatGPT, there is Google's Gemini. Notice it looks shockingly like ChatGPT. And then Claude, which looks shockingly like Gemini and ChatGPT. If you're just getting started out, they're pretty much the same. There are differences, but they're not enough to be a barrier to you. So the first question I usually get asked is, which one should I use? And the answer to that is whichever one you can use without taking on more subscriptions. So today we're going to look at using these LLMs through a browser. But when you're at your desk writing code, you're probably going to interact with these LLM engines through some sort of tool like VS Code or IntelliJ. They all sort of have a way to send things back and forth to the large language models. However, that hides a lot of what's going on. So for today, we're going to look at it in the browser. So the first thing we're going to do is imagine we got an email from our boss. We get into work, we get an email from our boss of things he wants us to do today. And like most emails, it's written with slightly poor grammar in a rushed fashion with run-on sentences, misspellings, and a lot of buried context. Now, I'm not going to read this to you, so go ahead and skim it. I'll give you 20, 30 seconds, get an idea of what's here. Then we're going to transform this into something useful. Okay. So when you interact with an LLM, you'd use a prompt. A prompt is just a set of instructions. We're going to do this in two of these. And the prompt is, you're a helpful assistant for a software developer. Your job is to read an email from a manager that's rushed, messy, and poorly written and extract a clear list of the developer's tasks for the day. For each task, if there's missing or ambiguous information, identify what needs clarification, then output the following sections: a clean task list, bullet point action items, request for clarification, a bullet point list of any info that's vague, missing, or unclear, and a reply email draft, which is a short professional response confirming the task list and asking the clarifying questions. So let's push the button. There's debate on the internet these days as to whether you need to provide a role for your LLM. I am of the opinion that you should, and I don't always do it myself, but if you think about the old garbage in, garbage out rule, if you don't tell the LM what to do, and it can really do lots of stuff, you're asking it to guess what you want. And if you can just be a little crisper with what you want, you're going to get better results. Now, my prompt was 4 or 5 lines, and that might be the kind of thing that you would save off and use every morning to deal with Alex. Let's take a look at Gemini. Gemini says, it looks like Alex had a very productive and caffeinated morning. That email is a classic brain dump, but there's a lot of high priority work buried in those run-on sentences. I like being affirmed here. We thought Alex was crazy. It turns out he's just over-caffeinated. So here's a breakdown of our tasks, followed by the questions you'll need to ask to get them done. Now, if you look at this, there's some tasks here. Fix and investigate the login failure, identify and resolve the weird UI UX issue on the dashboard, blah, blah, blah. If you paid me enough, I could probably write a bunch of regular expressions to pull out tasks from an email. So that part doesn't feel so magic to me. But let's go on. The questions for clarification, now that's interesting. That's beyond just extracting information out of a blob of text and more sort of considering the wholeness of what's in the email. And I wouldn't know where to start with that. So we've got, once again, a number of project deliverables and then also questions. And then here's our email draft. Now, LLMs always provide sort of a would you like me to keep going? They're never comfortable ending their work with you. They always want to offer something else. But you should read what they offer because if you're new to this, it can tell you what's possible. And if you're an old hand to this, sometimes it's a good idea to get some for free. Let's look at what ChatGPT came up with. Same kind of deal. Here's our clean task list. Looks pretty standard, slightly different format, but all the same information is here. And then questions for clarification. And then our reply email draft. Now, this is pretty helpful because I never liked trying to understand what people were trying to say. I want to get down and start writing good software. So this could probably save you 15 minutes out of your day. And it took about 30 seconds. So rather than think about some of these stories we talked about earlier, where they're trying to replace whole departments or all of the software developers, I think it makes more sense to try and find more 15-minute things in your day that you can get rid of to make more space. Your AI tools are going to be better at doing incremental things like that than they are at replacing you or some big part of what you do. Let's look at the next example. Back onto the project management things. We're going to make an email here for our product team. So the prompt is you're a helpful writing assistant supporting a software developer. Your task is to rewrite a rough set of notes into a clear, concise, and professional email for the product team. Focus on clarity, brevity, and appropriate tone. Expand short items for context. Use a confident and optimistic tone. The input is below. See this? AI can write any way that's ever been written. It knows all of these patterns. And by telling it to use a confident and optimistic tone, it's going to shape what it does. I'll show you an example. We'll start a new chat, paste this in. Below here are some Jira tickets. Now, I want you to look at what it's come up with here. It's expanded out these different pieces and made a proper email. So go ahead and give that a quick read. Then we're going to try this in Claude so we can kind of pass around the LLM love. Let's see what Claude does with it. I think Claude is a better writer than ChatGPT is. And I think ChatGPT is a better writer than Gemini. Now that can be, up for debate, but that's been my experience. So let's look at the quote, polished email for our product team. Go ahead and scan that. I'll give you 15, 20 seconds. So I'm going to scroll up now to let you see the Jira tickets one more time so you can see the context it had to work with. As you can verify, it had to unroll a number of ideas from what we put in there. See, look at this last one. Started schema mapping migration behind flag. That's a pretty terse Jira comment, the kind of thing I would write. But down below here, it's filled this out to a feature flag for safe rollout. Why did it do that? Well, I told it was writing for a developer. The flag part was a clue in the Jira ticket, and it knows product teams want, you guessed it, safe rollouts. That's helpful. So once again, for a slight bit of pain, just coming up with this little short piece here, and by handing it context I already have, like JIRA ticket numbers and titles, I've got a phenomenal email to the product team. And it's typed well, and if you know me, I am not the best typist. Also, it has create proper punctuation and grammar, which those rules can seem arcane sometimes. Let's move into some actual coding. In this case, we're going to say you're a senior software developer who explains or analyzes older code for teammates. Your task is to examine this code and report any logical deficiencies and bugs. Now, what follows is some old style Cold Fusion code. Whoops, we've just hit the wrong button, haven't we? Old style code. So this clearly is some type of validation. And here we're going to do a lovely insert into a legacy DB and then pop out an error message down below if it did not go well. So let's run it through the AI tool. Now remember, you can do this exact same thing with your AI enabled IDE. I've just chosen this because it's easier to show you what's really going on. So we'll pick Gemini too, because people have said Cold Fusion is dead. What do they know? All the LLMs speak it perfectly. Take that. All right, so looks like Gemini is already getting through here some information. No, I do not want to provide feedback. I'm in the middle of a presentation. Thank you very much. It says it's legacy Cold Fusion. On the surface, it's a standard form to database script, but from a modern security and reliability standpoint, it's a bit of a code smell minefield. That's pretty accurate, actually. This is exactly what it says it is. It's pointed out an SQL injection problem here, and you can see old Bobby drop tables are showing up. And then it offers the fix. It also points out a cross-site scripting problem, as well as some logical bugs. Here it says the code is checking form.question1 again to see if the person answered question 2. So now we've all created this mistake. It's because we write this first if statement, you copy it and paste it, and then change the 1 to a 2, except you forget 1, and the code goes into production and the cycle begins all over again. Somehow the LLM can statically check this stuff. I think that's pretty interesting. It points out a few more problems here. And then it starts getting opinionated by talking about performance and maintenance issues. Well, let's see what ChatGPT came up with. So it also figured out the validation was a mistake. It pointed out the cross-site scripting bit, the SQL injection bit, the non-portable SQL, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, remember me showing you the guillotine AI image. We cannot trust that this is an exhaustive check. We are still the human here. However, I find that for an initial pass, it's pretty dang good. But there's more. But wait, there's more, Billy Mays said. Now we're going to use the same code in the same chat to say you're a senior developer who always uses best practices and writes secure code. Refactor this legacy code to use object-oriented principles and rewrite the code using CF script. Porting stuff to CF script is so boring. And when you try and explain to the product team why you're going to spend sprints on it, they do not understand it. They just do not get it. Why would you rewrite something that works and we already paid for? But hey, what if you could get the LLM to do it? Once again, it's happily going to affirm our phenomenal move here. And then it's now writing a CF component. With query params. And then it's going to tell you all the great and marvelous things that it did. Let's see where ChatGPT ended up. Now it's going to kind of document out a new structure for us. This looks very familiar. It broke the validator into its own service component. And here it is in proper CF script. It even knows the ternary operator. What will it think of next? It's going to passively aggressively point out that we had a bug in our original code that won't leak into this new version, and so on and so on and so on. And I can't stress enough, folks, you can't just copy and paste this and ship it and say it's done. But think of all the syntax that it put together here and all the proper spacing that it did for us. We've gotten kind of far down the line here for very little effort. Let's look at regular expressions. So remember, I did a 6-part series of how to write regular expressions. If I only knew that ChatGPT was on the way, I could have saved 15 years. So the prompt is, you're a helpful assistant who writes and explains regular expressions. Your task is to write a regular expression to match file names ending image file extensions. Explain what part each of the pattern does. Provide 2 matching examples and 2 non-matching examples. So we're going to paste this in to a new chat. Then we're going to test it because, like I say, you can't just trust it. So it's given us a regular expression here. Let's go to Regex 101. Now, if you look at my test strings down here, the things it's highlighted are .jpeg, .png. This has lots of dots, and I only picked it because it has a .gif. This has JPG123. It knew not to take that. .gif.backup. It didn't pick that one. So, we've got a fairly well-tested regular expression here for almost no effort. And I think this to me falls under the domain of something you would look at the docs for and spend 5 to 10 minutes on. But what if you didn't have to? Remember, you have way more 10 to 15-minute tasks in a day than 4-hour tasks. Okay, now, confession. So I used blog CFC for my blog for a very long time, probably 4 years longer than I should have, because I was too lazy to port the data between blog CFC and WordPress. That really was the problem. And so one day I decided this was my problem. I'm going to fix it. And I thought, you know what? Let me just see how far I can get with ChatGPT. So the idea was I wanted to migrate all the data from the blog CFC schema into a WordPress schema. And what I gave it was this prompt and then these schema files. I'm going to pull these up. We're not going to look at these in depth because there's a lot here, but take a look. This is what you get straight out of blog CFC. Version 5.9 point something. It's not a ton of tables, but if you look at the WordPress tables, it's different, very different. Breaks things up differently, comments are handled differently, and so on. So let's see what it comes up with. So we'll paste in the prompt. And then the 2 SQL files. And why don't we do it in Claude too, just so you can see that I'm an equal opportunity chat person. So in Claude, you can see it's chewing right away at this already. It's telling us which fields in blog CFC go where in WordPress. And now it's making a migration script for us. And while I can understand all of this query syntax, it's not something I can immediately write fluently. I'd have to look some stuff up. So the value here, once again, isn't to replace anything you don't really know how to do or how to quality assess, but to avoid having to cave dive around documentation and weird blog articles to get something done. Let's check in with ChatGPT and see how it's getting on. So it's still formulating its answer. It used to be ChatGPT was the quickest, followed by Claude, then followed by Gemini. At this point, I think Gemini might be the quickest. In fact, let's do a little race. We're going to do this exact same thing. And I'm going to start Gemini super late. Now we'll check in with everyone. ChatGPT is still working, although it thinks it's going to start outputting data now. Claude is pretty much done. And see how it's popped up this little right-hand window? It does this a lot. And a lot of times what it comes up with is pretty great. Like if you ask it to make a landing page, it'll render that landing page on the screen so you can see it. I've made it make HTML games and they'll show up in this little right-hand thing. And this is something Claude does that none of the others really do. So know that that happens. And I think, if I had the chance to do it all over again, I might have just went all in on Claude. Okay, so Gemini is done. It's completed its answer. ChatGPT, see this little square? It's still kind of working through all of this, streaming content back to us. Claude is done. And here's our updates. So for data migrations between schemas, it can be pretty helpful to use an LLM to do a lot of the pattern matching or the context mapping that we would normally do ourselves. There's one more walkthrough, then we'll take questions. It's going to be on the database side. So in this case, I say, you're a database design expert helping clean up and optimize a schema. I'll paste a create table statement or multiple related tables. Your tasks are identify normalization issues, suggest design improvements, and provide a revised version of the schema. Use a mentoring tone. Be nice to me. Here's the schema. Well, let's run it. We'll give it to ChatGPT and Gemini. I don't want emails, buddy. Little passive aggressiveness. It looks like a classic early stage table that has grown organically over time. Such is all software, isn't it? Let's see what it came up with. The issue is flat table syndrome. You're storing several distinct entities in one place. Users as a string is risky. Yes, that's true. It's not referentially integrities, whatever that is. Blog. This is a problem because it supports multiple blogs. It should be on its own. It doesn't like my ISAM. That fell out of favor 20 years ago when this was created. So on and so on and so on. Now it's revising this schema. I think this is fascinating, though. Can you imagine somewhere inside of this little AI engine is a database optimization engine? And it's there just waiting for you to ask it questions. All I provided was create statements and a couple of sentences of instruction. And look what we have. We've audited this data table structure. We've gotten a better version from this. We could ask it to make a migration script if we like. And it'll never complain, never try to go home early. Here we have some of the same issues pointed out by ChatGPT. Yep, so this is a point. WordPress actually handles this a little differently. views inside the entry table, it's pointed out, and so on and so on and so on. So, is it a DBA in a box? Not exactly. But if you're the kind of developer where you need to moonlight as a DBA sometimes because you just don't have access to one, now you've got a database buddy. So, with that, I want to revert to questions. The best question is going to get a gift card as a thank you. So, let's pull up the question pod and put the access code back on the screen. How do I see the questions?
So generally, it will be in the Q&A part. I don't think we have any, but there are. You can check out the chat window. So Steve has asked if I can look at what you pasted into the prompts.
For which one, Steve?
The last one.
This one?
I think we also have another question from Scott in the chat.
Let me get that on a different screen here. Let's make sure Steve has what he needs. Steve, are you able to get the parts of it you were curious about? Okay, cool. Next question I see is from Scott. Have I found much difference in running these exercises in the browser as opposed to running them in an IDE like Claude Code? Good question. I think that sort of depends on what you're trying to do. I think when my mind is in an IDE, I'm expecting it to do more programmery tasks. And so something like auditing a database table, I don't know if that would occur to me or how I would get that done. So your mileage may vary. I think you just got to use the right interface for the work you want to do. Leonardo, under what circumstances would you trust two or more agents working together? What parts will you review? Well, I would say all of it. AI makes mistakes, as you saw from those 3 images. Like, that's not a canned demo. That was me asking it the same prompt 3 times. So I don't know what I would trust from an AI to do, but certainly writing an email is of lower consequence than writing code that supports a hospital. So consider the gravity of what you're doing and the cost of getting it wrong and decide how much you want to trust it. My trust level is very low. I feel like I'm a pretty good reviewer these days. Sean asked, does Claude or Chat GPT publish a versioning FAQ that lets you know what database syntax versions it standardizes on? I do not know the answer to that. Let's ask it. I love just freelancing here. Who knows? Do you publish? Nice. Now, to be truthful, I didn't have to fix all those typos because this technology wants to understand me more than it wants to take my exact input and do something with it. But let's see what it says. Assume strict behavior. Yeah, I mean, it has some standards. And then, we could ask it more, but I think that's the point. Donna, have you been able to successfully ask the LLM to give their confidence level and their own answer? If so, which tool is the most honest? I haven't tried that, Donna. That's an interesting thing to say. You're in the lead. Zach says, have you tried Perplexity? Any comparisons? Doesn't Perplexity just kind of proxy LLMs? I'm not sure if it has its own engine or not, but I used it a little bit, a little while ago, a couple, maybe a year and a half ago, but it doesn't fit in my workflow right now. Some people love it though. Sean, if some ChatGPT spits out some code, how to know what SQL Server version it targets? Is it always stable? Yeah, that's where you'd want to just talk to it. Matt Darby, you're 100% correct, sir. Long live NC DevCon. Oh yeah, I did. I did write an AI book for seniors. I'll plug that since Dan Frederick is asking about it. But my mom called me last summer and she couldn't get her Wi-Fi working, and she was in tears. She was moving. It was stressful, and she wanted me to help her. And I'm 500 miles away, and I'm like, what am I supposed to do with this? So I pulled up ChatGPT, and together we fixed her Wi-Fi. And I thought, what is it like to live in a world that's, my mom's smart. She was an ER nurse for 37 years and held life in her hands, but she can't get her Wi-Fi working. She's 70 something years old. Sad. Someone should teach her how to use AI. And I thought, maybe that's me, but I'll need to do it in book form. So I wrote this book. It came out at the end of November last year, and it's selling pretty decently. And it's my hope, like I've been doing in the cold fusion community, is just to share what I've learned with others to hopefully make their lives 2% better. And yes, buy it and give it to your parents. Zach says Perplexity now has its own model, in-house models under the Sonar family. I didn't know anything about that, so thanks for letting me know. I think we have 3-4 more minutes for questions, but for those of you who attended, I appreciate you coming by, listening to what I had to say. If there's any takeaways here, I would say that AI may not be awesome, but you are, and you're important. Your creativity, your intelligence, your diligentness, your understanding of the problem domain that you work in, these are not replaceable by a machine. And I don't think that it's going to be. I think this machine is here to help you be you a little better, but I don't think it can replace you. In fact, the companies that thought it could have either rehired or gone out of business. So with that, I want to encourage you to embrace this technology for what it's worth. It is another technology with its pros and cons and flaws and ugly spots, but if you put it in the right spot in your workflow, I think it can really save you some time, and it's kind of fun too. So Donna, you are the winner for the $50 prize. Dan Fredericks is pointing out my book, How Seniors Learn AI. This was a passion project for me. You don't have to buy a copy, but the people that have went through it, it's really unlocked how they interact with technology, because for the first time, the technology doesn't yell at them when they get something wrong. It tries to understand them. And I think that is one of the best parts about it. Oh, Padma. Yes, exactly. So the question is, will AI make people lazy and not really writing code? I think it will for a little while, but then reality is going to catch up. I think reality will catch up, because once again, what AI does is not always awesome or perfect. Just like those pictures, like we're very careful to look at the requirements it failed to fulfill, because in software, just because it puts out a lot of stuff using vibrant colors doesn't mean it's right. You know what I mean? A lot of the obvious mistakes we saw in the pictures aren't so obvious in source code, but they'll come to light. And I think that's where the quote lazy people will know what part they still own, and will do a good job of it or find another career. I hear they're hiring for baristas these days. Well, thank you all.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. It has been a wonderful session. So we need to get the next speaker in.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Have a good day.
You too.